The salvage pod had been drifting for 17 days when it finally crashed onto the uncharted moon of Cathera Prime. Ilara dragged herself from the wreckage, her emergency rations reduced to a single protein bar, her water recycler cracked and leaking. The air was breathable but thin. The landscape stretched before her in shades of violet and crimson, alien vegetation that swayed without wind, and in the distance jagged mountains that clawed at twin suns. She had maybe 3 days. 4 if she was lucky. The distress beacon was active, but this far into the outer rim rescue could take weeks. Ilara knew the mathematics of survival, and they weren't in her favor. Still, she was human. Humans didn't lie down and wait for death. They pushed forward even when logic said to stop. On the second day, she found the den. It was tucked into a canyon wall, partially hidden by bioluminescent moss that pulsed like a heartbeat. Ilara approached carefully, her hand on the plasma cutter at her belt, not much of a weapon, but it was all she had. The entrance was wide enough for her to slip through, and inside the temperature was warmer, almost comfortable. That's when she heard the growling. They emerged from the shadows like liquid mercury, sleek, 4-legged creatures with obsidian fur that seemed to absorb light. Their eyes glowed amber, intelligent and ancient. The largest stood nearly 2 meters at the shoulder, its muscles rippling beneath its coat. Pack hunters, apex predators. Ilara had stumbled into a den of what the xenobiologists would later classify as Catheran shadow. Wolves, though wolves didn't do them justice. Alpha, a massive female with scars etched across her muzzle, stalked forward. Behind her, 5 cubs wrestled and played, oblivious to the intruder. But there was a 6th cub, smaller than the rest, pressed against the den wall. It was watching Ilara with those same amber eyes. But where the others showed curiosity or playful aggression, this one showed something else. Hunger. The smallest cub was emaciated, its ribs visible even beneath the dark fur. While the others were sleek and healthy, this one had been pushed aside, denied its share. Ilara recognized the dynamic instantly. In any pack, the weakest sometimes got left behind. Nature's cruel calculus. The alpha growled, a sound that vibrated through Ilara's chest cavity. A warning. Leave or die. Ilara should have backed away, should have fled. But her eyes kept returning to that smallest cub, to Tarn, though she wouldn't learn his name until much later. His eyes met hers, and in that moment something passed between human and alien. Recognition, understanding. Without thinking, Ilara reached into her jacket and pulled out the protein bar. Her last meal, the thing standing between her and starvation. The alpha tensed, ready to strike, but Ilara didn't move toward the larger wolves. Instead, she knelt down and slid the bar across the stone floor toward Tarn. The den went absolutely silent. Tarn looked at the offering, then at Ilara, then back at the protein bar. Slowly, hesitantly, he crept forward. The other cubs watched, confused. The alpha's growl deepened, but she didn't attack. Perhaps she was as confused as her offspring. Tarn reached the protein bar and sniffed it. Then, with delicate precision, he took it in his jaws and began to eat. It was meant for a human. The taste would be alien to him, the nutrients not quite right. But he ate anyway, and Ilara could see strength returning to his small frame with every bite. She smiled. "That's it, little one, eat." The alpha approached then, and Ilara thought her time had come. But the massive creature didn't attack. Instead, she lowered her head and pressed her nose against Ilara's hand. Cold, wet, and surprisingly gentle. Then she did something that made Ilara's breath catch. The alpha bowed. One by one, the other wolves followed suit. Even the cubs stopped playing and lowered themselves. Only Tarn remained standing, still chewing the last of the protein bar, his amber eyes never leaving Ilara's face. The rescue ship arrived 6 days later. They found Ilara alive and healthy, surrounded by a pack of alien predators who refused to leave her side. The rescue team nearly opened fire before Ilara threw herself between them and the wolves. "Don't. They're with me!" The mission commander, a grizzled veteran named Kovac, stared at the scene in disbelief. "Ma'am, those are Catheran shadow wolves. They're classified as extreme danger xenofauna. They don't bond with humans. They don't bond with anyone." "Tell them that," Ilara said, as Tarn, now noticeably larger and healthier, pressed against her leg, his purr-like rumble vibrating through her bones. The alpha had brought Ilara food for 6 days. Fresh kills from the plains, edible vegetation, even water from a hidden spring. The pack had protected her from the nocturnal predators, the violent storms, and the cold nights. They had adopted her as one of their own. When Alara finally boarded the rescue ship, Tarn howled, a sound that echoed across the canyon and was taken up by the entire pack. The commander insisted they leave immediately, but Alara stood at the airlock, watching the wolves below. "I'll come back," she promised. "I swear it." 3 standard years later, Alara returned to Cathera Prime. Not as a castaway, but as an ambassador. She had spent those years learning everything about the Catheran shadow wolves, their language of growls and body movements, their complex social structures, their fierce loyalty, and when the coalition needed allies in the outer rim, when the Zendrick Empire began its expansion and war seemed inevitable, it was Alara who stood before the Galactic Council. With Tarn at her side, Tarn was no longer the smallest cub. He had grown into a magnificent alpha in his own right, but he still carried the memory of kindness shown by a starving human who gave away her last meal. And he wasn't alone. Behind him stood 300 shadow wolves, warriors from a dozen clans, all answering the call. The Zendrick had numbers. They had weapons. They had conquered 100 worlds, but they had never faced humans and their impossible bonds. They had never faced creatures who remembered every kindness, who repaid loyalty with loyalty, who would follow a human into hell itself because she had once fed the smallest among them. The war was brutal. The war was costly, but humanity didn't stand alone. And when the Zendrick finally sued for peace, the treaty was signed in a room where Alara sat with her hand resting on Tarn's head, while the shadow wolves of Cathera Prime stood guard. The alien diplomats whispered among themselves, trying to understand how this had happened. How had humanity tamed the untamable? But they didn't understand. Humans didn't tame. Humans shared. Even when they had nothing left to give, they shared. And the universe remembered. Alara smiled as Tarn's amber eyes met hers, the same eyes that had watched her slide a protein bar across a den floor 3 years ago. The same eyes that had never forgotten. "Good boy," she whispered, and Tarn, alpha of alphas, protector of humans, rumbled his agreement. The clan had vowed loyalty forever. And forever for a shadow wolf was no small thing.